At the banquet, in front of everyone, I saw another man touch her lips, and my words made her turn pale. I don't know what set me off more, the way he touched her lips, or the way she let him. The banquet was supposed to be a routine evening, corporate event. Downtown Chicago. Big-name hotel with spotless white tablecloths, polished wine glasses, and 100 versions of the same phony smile. Kristen had been excited all week. "You never come to these things," she'd said, brushing lint off my shoulder. "It'll be fun. You'll see." I went for her. To be supportive, I guess. I wasn't exactly in the mood to play dress-up and pretend to enjoy lukewarm steak while making small talk with people whose names I'd forget the second I walked away. But Kristen had insisted, so I'd smiled, nodded, and let her pick my tie. She looked stunning. I mean that. She wore this sleek black silk dress that hugged her in all the right places. Low-cut but tasteful, bold but not over the top. She had her hair swept up in a way that left her shoulders bare. I couldn't count how many people turned to look when we walked in. I didn't blame them. She had that presence. Confident, graceful, magnetic. I used to take pride in it. Now I'm not so sure. We were mingling. She introduced me to a few people from her department, names like Darren, Trish, Melanie. I nodded, laughed in the right places, sipped my drink. The usual. I drifted into a conversation with one of the regional directors about supply chains, zoning permits, and, God help me, tax incentives. Kristen had floated off into another corner of the room, talking with some guys in suits. That's when I saw him. Navy blue suit, gelled hair, clean-shaven with that kind of casual smugness that some guys carry like a cologne. Kristen was leaning toward him, too close. Closer than necessary. Her hand was resting lightly on her wine glass, her body angled toward his, legs crossed just so. I knew that body language. It wasn't cold or neutral, it was open, inviting, flirtatious. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just the lighting. Maybe the drinks were kicking in. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then I saw it. His hand, slow, deliberate, rose and brushed the corner of her lips. A single motion, like he was wiping something away. She smiled, laughed. Not nervously, not like someone caught off guard, but like someone in control. Like someone who wanted to be seen. People near them chuckled. A few shared glances. Someone raised an eyebrow and looked in my direction. I felt the shift in the room like a ripple in water. Maybe they didn't know who I was. Or maybe they did. Didn't matter. I locked eyes with Kristen for a second, just a flash. Her expression changed. Barely, but I saw it. That flicker of guilt or panic or maybe just surprise. But just as quickly, it was gone. Replaced by the same polished smile she wore for everyone else. She raised her glass and gave me a playful little wave. Like everything was fine. Like I was imagining things. I forced a smile. Nodded. Turned back to my half-finished drink and the conversation I wasn't really in anymore. For everyone else, the moment passed. Nothing to talk about. Just another laugh in a loud room. But I felt something tighten in my chest. Something deep and cold. It wasn't jealousy, not really. It was recognition. Like hearing a distant echo of a sound you forgot you knew. The kind of thing that sticks with you long after the room goes quiet. Kristen returned to my side 10 minutes later. Cheerful, bubbly, just a touch tipsy. She touched my arm, whispered something about the dessert looking amazing, and led me to the buffet table like nothing had happened. And I followed, because what else was I supposed to do? 'Cause a scene? Make a fool of myself? So I played along, smiled, posed for photos, clinked glasses when the CEO made his speech, laughed at jokes I didn't find funny, watched Kristen work the room like a seasoned performer, all charm and grace. She complimented the catering, gushed over a coworker's baby photos, even danced a little to the jazz quartet near the stage. But the image of that man's hand on her face, that stayed with me. It looped in my head like a broken record, over and over. The way she leaned in, the way she smiled afterward, the way people looked at me like they knew something I didn't. I started noticing other things too. How she kept glancing at her phone. How she seemed hyper-aware of who was around us. How she avoided introducing me to certain people. How the man from earlier never came close again, not even by coincidence. Almost like they were trying not to be too obvious. The rest of the night blurred by. Conversations, speeches, more drinks. By the time we got back to the valet, my head was spinning. Not from the alcohol, but from a gnawing feeling I couldn't name. Something had shifted. Not just between us, but inside me. Kristen leaned on my arm, laughing about how sore her feet were. God, remind me not to wear heels to these things, she said. Next time, I'm going full sneakers and a cocktail dress. Screw elegance. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. You seem to enjoy yourself. She looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said, too quickly. She tilted her head, as if weighing whether to push the issue. Then she smiled again and kissed my cheek. You're cute when you're grumpy. I didn't respond. On the ride home, she talked about someone's terrible karaoke at last year's banquet and how HR almost had to step in. I nodded along, barely listening. Outside the window, the city lights blurred past. But inside, I wasn't moving. I was stuck, frozen in that moment back in the ballroom. I'd seen something I wasn't meant to see, or maybe something I'd been refusing to see for a while. That wasn't just some innocent, flirty exchange. That wasn't a moment you brush off. That was a crack. A small one, sure. Just a hairline fracture. But enough. And the thing about cracks is they always spread. The thing about doubt is that once it takes root, it spreads. Quietly. Relentlessly. It's not loud like anger. It doesn't need to be. Doubt is patient. It waits for you to be alone with your thoughts. And then it whispers. That night, long after Kristen had fallen asleep beside me, I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling. I could hear the sound of traffic outside, the soft hum of our refrigerator down the hall, and her breathing slow, even, peaceful. She looked so at ease, like nothing had happened, like there hadn't been a stranger's hand brushing her lips while I stood 10 feet away pretending I didn't see it. I didn't sleep. Instead, I replayed the last few months over and over in my head. Things that hadn't made sense at the time. Things I'd brushed off. Excuses I'd accepted too easily. Her trips to Houston, for example. They'd started around February. At first, they were framed as quarterly training sessions or regional planning conferences. Kristen worked in strategic partnerships, so the travel wasn't unusual. But there were little things. She'd never share the agenda. No hotel receipts. No name badges. I'd ask how the meetings went, and she'd give vague answers. Productive. Exhausting. A lot of slide decks. One time, just to be playful, I asked her to bring me back a souvenir. A magnet or a keychain. Nothing expensive. Just something silly to mark the trip. She came home empty-handed. I totally forgot, she said, laughing. But who wants Houston on their fridge anyway? I had laughed with her at the time. But now, lying there in the dark, that missing magnet felt like a flashing red light. And the phone calls, late-night ones on the balcony, always hushed tones, always ending the second I walked into the room. She'd smile and say it was work or her sister or just catching up with a friend. But when I asked which friend, she'd pause. You don't know them, she'd say. College friend. From before you and I met. That happened more than once. Too many times to be coincidence. It became so routine that I stopped asking. Then there was the yoga thing. Out of nowhere, she developed this new passion for morning yoga. She said it helped her manage stress. Said it gave her clarity. She started waking up at 6 to go to class. I was happy for her. I even offered to drive her once when my car was in the shop. She refused. Said I'd be too bored waiting outside. It's a girl's only kind of vibe, she told me. But there were no yoga mats. No blocks. No gym bag. No change of clothes. Just her slipping out the door in leggings and a hoodie, keys in hand, not even carrying a water bottle. One morning, she left so early I walked into the laundry room to grab a hoodie and saw her yoga outfit from the day before still folded on the dryer, untouched. The realization didn't hit me then. Or maybe it did and I just didn't want to believe it. There were other signs too. Stray details that never added up. like the new perfume, light, floral, and definitely not something she'd ever worn before. She said it was a sample from a coworker. "I don't even like it," she said. "It's too strong." But she wore it again the next day, and again that weekend. I once caught the scent on her coat even though she hadn't worn perfume in the house that day. When I asked, she looked confused. "Maybe it rubbed off from someone at work?" she suggested. "We share the same coat rack, right?" She also started journaling, a habit she'd never had before. She called it mental detoxing, said it helped her stay focused and sort through her emotions. I thought it was great, honestly. We were both busy, and anything that helped her decompress was a good thing. Except I never saw a journal, never saw a notebook. Once, I joked that I'd read her deep thoughts one day, and she looked at me like I'd slapped her. "They're private," she said flatly. "That's the point." That same week, she bought a new lock for her filing cabinet in the home office. Said she had to store some sensitive HR files from work. I didn't push it. God, I didn't push anything. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be the husband who trusted his wife, who didn't snoop or question every little thing. I told myself it was better to give her space, that not everything needed to be dissected. But looking back now, all those fragments, the perfume, the yoga, the phone calls, the Houston trips, they started forming a picture. Not a clear one, but one that didn't feel good. At the banquet, they all snapped into focus. That's what it was. That 1 second, seeing her lean in toward that man like no one was watching, like I wasn't watching, was the moment the puzzle pieces finally fit. I remembered something else too. A few weeks back, she had joked about how I'd never make it in her work environment. "Too honest," she said. "You'd hate the politics." She was smiling when she said it, but the look in her eyes wasn't teasing. It was distant, like she wasn't talking about me at all. I also started recalling the way she talked about one of her colleagues, a guy named Joshua. She only mentioned him twice, casually, both times in a group setting. "Josh is so good at reading people," she'd said once over dinner with friends. Like, scary good. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now I wondered, was that the same man from the banquet? The one who wiped her lip like they were alone in a room full of people? I didn't know, but I was starting to suspect. There was one morning, maybe a month ago, when I caught her texting under the covers. It was just before sunrise. She didn't see me wake up. I rolled over and pretended to stay asleep. She was holding the phone close to her chest, smiling at something on the screen. Typing, erasing, typing again. When I shifted in bed, she clicked the screen off and tucked the phone under the pillow. Then she turned toward me, placed her arm around my chest and said, "You're warm. Don't move." I remember feeling both comforted and cold. I didn't ask who she was texting. What's wild is that none of these moments screamed betrayal on their own. Not one. If you told me this story and changed the names, I'd probably tell you it was all circumstantial. That maybe you were just being insecure. But when it's your life, your house, your wife, you feel it in your gut. You know when something is wrong, even when you can't prove it. I still hadn't said anything to her. I didn't even know what I would say. I didn't want to accuse her without proof, and I wasn't the type to go digging through her purse or her phone. I'd always prided myself on being respectful, trusting, mature. But suddenly, that trust felt like a weakness, like a blindfold I had willingly tied over my own eyes. After the banquet, I stayed up alone for hours in the kitchen. I sat with my laptop open, staring at the desktop, not browsing, not working, just staring. That's when I noticed Kristen's work laptop sitting next to mine. Hers was silver, thinner, newer. I remembered how she'd left it there before going to bed. Normally, she kept it in her bag. Always zipped, always carried from room to room. Tonight, she hadn't. It was a small thing. But then again, small things are where the truth lives. When you've been living on suspicion for months, proof isn't just a revelation. It's a gut punch. It doesn't come as a thunderclap, but as a slow, quiet click. The lock sliding open, the mask falling off. It was past midnight. Kristen was upstairs, asleep, the faint glow of her phone charging on the nightstand. I was still at the kitchen table, the remains of our date night takeout pushed aside. My laptop open but untouched. Her work computer sat right next to mine. Screen dim but still awake, the cursor blinking in an open window. I told myself not to look, that it wasn't who I was, that snooping was a line I'd never cross. But my hands moved anyway. The laptop wasn't locked. Not the way she usually had it. Just the desktop showing a messenger window on the right side of the screen, half minimized. Blue and gray bubbles stacked like a nervous heartbeat. Clicked once. The window maximized. Her name at the top. His name just below it, Joshua. I felt my stomach drop. The conversation was recent, earlier that day. I scrolled, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might echo off the kitchen walls. Photos. Not **TS or memes. Photos she'd sent. Hotel rooms with neutral carpeting and expensive-looking headboards. A bottle of champagne on a tray. Curtains drawn. City skyline glowing faintly through the glass. One of them had her in it. A reflection in a mirror, blurry but unmistakable. She was smiling at the camera, holding up 2 fingers like a playful peace sign. My hands shook as I clicked the next image. A close-up of a hand, his, I assumed, holding hers across a table. Hotel stationery in the background. There rings of condensation from 2 glasses. Her nails painted the soft pink she always saved for work trips. The messages weren't ambiguous. They weren't flirty misunderstandings or jokes taken out of context. They were affectionate, familiar. I miss you already. Last night was perfect. 2 more weeks until Houston. We'll make it look real soon. And then the one that nearly made me drop the laptop. The banquet worked. Everything's on track. He has no clue. No clue. They were talking about me. I scrolled further back, the words blurring as my eyes scanned them. She'd written about how the process was moving faster than she'd hoped. How she was handling me. How she needed him to be patient just a little longer. It wasn't just an affair. It was a plan. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, trying to catch my breath. My reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger. Jaw tight, eyes sunken, some mixture of rage and disbelief. For a moment, I thought about closing it all, pretending I'd never seen it, going upstairs, crawling into bed, burying my face in the pillow beside her. Maybe I could wake up tomorrow and convince myself I dreamed it. But the messages were still there, staring back at me like a confession. I clicked the attachments folder she'd been using. More photos. **TS of flight confirmations. Calendar invites. Even a map of downtown Houston with 2 hotel locations pinned in red. Notes in the margins. Backup. Use alternate card. No paper trail. Each click was another nail in the coffin of my marriage. I don't know how long I sat there. The clock on the microwave ticked from 12:04 to 12:47. My coffee went cold. The street outside emptied. Eventually, I pushed back from the table and walked into the living room, laptop still in my hands. The carpet felt different under my feet, like the house itself was tilting. I looked at our wedding photo on the mantel, Kristen in her white dress, me in my navy suit, both of us laughing at something the photographer had said. My thumb brushed the edge of the frame without thinking. 9 years. All those nights cooking together, the road trips, the inside jokes no one else understood. They all felt like props on a stage. I went back to the kitchen and scrolled up one last time. I read her words carefully, line by line. We're almost done. Therapy suggestion next week. Need him to think it's his idea. Keep everything clean. He can't know until paper's ready. It was like reading instructions for dismantling a piece of machinery. Except the machinery was my life. I felt a strange calmness settle over me. Heavy but sharp, like ice water poured into my veins. For months I'd been drifting in a fog, second-guessing myself, wondering if I was imagining things. Now I wasn't. Now I knew. It wasn't a mistake or a weak moment. It was orchestrated, planned. She wasn't just cheating. She was engineering an exit. I opened my own laptop, copied the entire chat thread, and saved it to a folder titled Evidence. **TS, Photos, timestamps, attachments. Everything. I even forwarded the files to a private email account I rarely used just in case. My hands moved automatically, methodically, like I'd rehearsed this. When I finished, I shut her laptop and set it gently back where I'd found it. The screen went black, reflecting only my own face. I sat there a long time, listening to the house, the creak of the pipes, the faint rush of cars far away, the quiet rhythm of Kristen's footsteps upstairs as she turned over in her sleep. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger is hot, explosive. This was something colder, heavier, like a stone dropped into deep water. I thought about going upstairs and waking her up, shoving the laptop in her face, demanding answers, watching her scramble for an explanation. I imagined the look she'd give me, the practiced surprise, the tears at the edges of her eyes, the performance of remorse. But then I remembered one of the messages I'd just read. If he finds out early, shift blame. Suggest therapy. Make him feel guilty. She had rehearsed for this. She had a script. I wasn't going to give her the stage. So I sat there, silent, gathering myself, letting the reality settle like sediment at the bottom of a glass. Eventually, I closed my own laptop too. The kitchen went dark except for the blue glow of the microwave clock. 1:13 a.m. I stood, poured the cold coffee down the sink, and rinsed the mug. My hands moved slowly, carefully, like I was afraid of making noise. When I finally went upstairs, Kristen shifted in her sleep but didn't wake. I watched her for a moment in the dim light from the hallway. Her hair spread across the pillow, her breathing steady. She looked peaceful, innocent. For a second, a flicker of grief passed through me. Not for her, but for what we'd been, for the life I thought I had. Then I turned off the light and closed the door. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling. No more fragments, no more guessing. I had my proof. And once you have proof, there's no going back. People think betrayal is about moments, the affair itself, the discovery, the confrontation. But sitting there in the gray light of dawn, I realized it wasn't a moment at all. It was a system, a sequence, a set of steps someone had mapped out long before I even saw the cracks. The day after I found the messages, I didn't go to work. I called in sick, which wasn't a lie. My body felt heavy, like I'd been carrying a sandbag strapped to my chest. Kristen had already left when I got up. She texted that she was heading to the office early. "Big morning," she wrote, as if nothing had changed. I walked into the kitchen and stared at the counter where her laptop had been the night before. I half expected her to have taken everything with her. Laptop, notes, the faintest trace of evidence. But the house was exactly as she'd left it. Coffee mug on the drying rack. A half-open folder on the table with some bills. And our shared cloud drive open on my own laptop, where I'd left it after forwarding the messages to myself. It wasn't curiosity that made me click. It was instinct. I wanted to know how deep it went. Inside the cloud folder were the usual things: mortgage statements, tax returns, insurance documents, the digital junk drawer of a marriage. But tucked near the bottom was a subfolder titled Consulting. We had no consulting business. My pulse quickened. I opened it. What I found didn't feel real. There were spreadsheets, legal drafts, notes. Each file was named like an innocuous work document. Budget, Plan A, therapy outline. But when I opened them, they read like instructions for a heist. Not of money, but of a life. One document was a draft legal agreement transferring ownership of our Austin house. The place we'd bought together 3 years ago, before Kristen's Houston trips. My name was listed in one section, then crossed out in another, replaced with her signature. It wasn't final, but it was prepared. Sitting there, waiting. Another spreadsheet listed steps in bullet points. I read them aloud, my voice hollow in the empty kitchen. Stage 1. Create emotional distance. Reduce int asterisk Macy. Stage 2. Suggest counseling to establish concern. Stage 3. Stage public incident to justify exit. Stage 4. Finalize property transfer and exit marriage cleanly. My hand tightened on the mouse. My own life broken into phases like a project plan. There were even timelines. Weeks marked with colored boxes. Notes like, Houston trip aligns with stage 2, and Banquet equals stage 3 candidate. She had literally scheduled my humiliation. I scrolled further. Another file contained what looked like talking points. Lines she could use in conversations with me. Express concern for his stress levels. Remind him of past arguments. Encourage therapy. Frame move as mutually beneficial. It was surreal reading my marriage turned into a script. I pushed back from the table, heart pounding, and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Dog walkers, delivery trucks, sunlight creeping over the roofs. Everything looked normal. But inside, I was reading proof that the last 9 years of my life had been converted into a flowchart. I sat back down and opened the next file. This one was a budget. Not our household budget, but a projection of her life after me. Hotel stays, flights, even legal fees. A column marked asset transfer with figures beside each property. Our house, her 401k, my retirement fund. Another column labeled projected outcome with totals in green. There it was, the plan to strip everything bare before she left. I felt my stomach turn. It wasn't just infidelity. It was theft, premeditated, executed with precision. She had rehearsed how to leave me, how to take everything, how to make me look like the guilty one. And if I hadn't stumbled onto that laptop last night, it would have worked. I clicked open one last document. A Word file, only 2 pages. The title read, Public Narrative. It outlined how she would explain our breakup to friends, co-workers, even family. Andrew has been distant. Andrew resisted therapy. Andrew had anger issues. Each point neatly numbered, ready to deploy. I could almost hear her voice reading it. Calm, practiced, wounded. She'd make herself the victim. She'd already started little comments to friends about my long hours, my grumpiness, the way she worried about me. Suddenly, past conversations snapped into place. The times she'd said, "We're just not connecting anymore." The gentle nudges toward therapy. The half-hearted apologies after our arguments. The way she'd started leaving a paper trail of her concerns in text messages. Always kind, always understanding, always positioning herself as the one trying to save us. She wasn't saving anything. She was building a case. I sat there staring at the screen, my hand frozen on the mouse. In the reflection of the laptop, my own face looked pale and drawn. I thought about every time I'd defended her to friends. Every time I told myself she was just stressed, just busy, just tired. Every time I'd swallowed my gut instinct. And then I thought about how she must have seen me. An obstacle to be managed, a script to be followed, a piece on a chessboard she was quietly clearing. I copied everything. Every file, every spreadsheet, every draft. I zipped the folder and emailed it to myself, then to a second email account, then to a thumb drive. My hands were steady now, no longer trembling. A quiet, deliberate steadiness, like I'd finally stopped fighting the current and let it carry me. When the last file finished uploading, I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. Sunlight was streaming through the window now, catching on the wedding photo on the mantel. For a moment, I stared at it. Kristen's smile, my arm around her, the vows we'd spoken. All of it felt like a still from someone else's movie. I realized then that my marriage hadn't been falling apart naturally. It had been dismantled, piece by piece, like an old house scheduled for demolition. And I'd been standing inside, oblivious, while she loosened every beam. I wasn't oblivious anymore. I stood, stretched my stiff legs, and poured myself a glass of water. The clock on the stove read 8:42 a.m. Kristen would be at her office by now, or wherever she really went. For the first time in months, my mind felt clear. I wasn't just a man with suspicions anymore. I was a man with evidence, with a plan of my own forming in the back of my mind. I knew what came next wasn't going to be easy, but the moment I zipped that folder and sent it to myself, something shifted. The helplessness cracked. In its place, something colder, something stronger, resolve. I wasn't going to wait for her script to play out. I wasn't going to be cast as the guilty one. Not anymore. By the third day, I stopped feeling like a man living in a marriage and started feeling like an actor trapped in someone else's production. After uncovering the consulting folder, I couldn't let it go. My body went through the motions: coffee, shower, email check. But my mind was somewhere else entirely, combing over the files, trying to understand just how deep this went. Kristen still acted normal. Too normal. She kissed my cheek in the mornings, texted me from work, and asked me if we should start looking at new patio furniture for the spring. It was surreal, like watching someone smile while a house burns down behind them. That week, I waited for her to leave and went back into the cloud folders. I hadn't touched the personal notes directory before. It sounded harmless, maybe even decoy-level harmless. But when I opened it, what I found made everything else, the photos, the spreadsheets, even the affair itself, feel like the warm-up act. It was all scripts, literally. Documents with titles like Therapy Session 1_ Dialogue Draft, Conflict Resolution _V2, and If He Finds Out _, pages and pages of pre-written conversations, rehearsed responses, scenarios outlined with bullet points. She'd written out entire arguments before we had them. I read through one called Kitchen Disagreement Tone Management. It laid out a hypothetical argument, triggered by me forgetting to take out the trash, apparently. Kristen had outlined exactly what she would say, how she would start vulnerable, then escalate, then cry, then retreat. Let him feel victorious in round 1. Circle back emotionally 2 days later and reframe. That was an actual line. Another file was labeled Therapist Framing Strategy. Inside was a list of statements she could use if we ever went to couples counseling. Things like, he shuts down emotionally. I don't feel seen in this marriage. I've tried so hard to communicate, but he gets defensive. The kicker? Under each bullet, she included an anticipated Andrew response, followed by a counterstatement. She was preparing rebuttals for words I hadn't even spoken yet. I sat there in the home office, staring at the screen, feeling like I'd stepped into a twisted dress rehearsal. The fights we'd had in the last few months, those moments I'd thought were raw, spontaneous, real. They'd been read from a script. Not my script. Hers. The silent treatments. The tension over dinner. The way she'd started crying when I mentioned being tired of our routines. Every single one matched something in those documents. She had been guiding me through staged conversations, collecting data points, and shaping narratives. I wasn't just being manipulated. I was being directed. And the more I read, the more I realized just how far she'd taken it. One script was titled Emergency Sympathy Reset. It was a last resort scenario, a plan for if I ever became too distant or suspicious. It involved her bringing up an old trauma, a miscarriage she'd had before we were married, something she rarely talked about. The notes said, only deploy if timeline requires emotional reintegration. Used during high-tension period. Crying should be natural. Avoid eye contact initially. Let him lead physical contact. It made me sick. There were flowcharts too, digital ones built in some planning app one didn't recognize. They had names like Emotional Strategy Tree and Response Map Week 9. Each decision I might make had arrows pointing to options she could use in response. If resistant to therapy, suggest separation but frame as temporary. If he discovers messages, gaslight plus focus on misinterpretation. I wasn't in a marriage. I was in a story she'd outlined down to the punctuation. I spent hours combing through the files, highlighting key phrases, saving everything I could. Every time I thought I'd reached the bottom, another file showed up. A chart of my emotional patterns. A mock-up of a text conversation she could send to a mutual friend to subtly frame me as volatile. Notes on which of my family members were sympathetic and which were non-influencers. She had even written a message she planned to send to my younger sister, months from now, portraying herself as heartbroken but concerned about my withdrawal and anxiety. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was stunned. Frozen in place. Like someone slowly realizing the play they've been watching is about their own life. I started to remember things. Conversations that felt off. How Kristen had once asked me, "If we ever split, would you hate me?" I'd laughed, told her not to be dramatic. Now I knew it was a probe, a data-gathering moment. She was learning the edges of my reactions, timing the script. I thought about the time I'd vented to her about work stress, and how she gently asked if I thought I might be a little depressed. At the time, I appreciated the concern, but I found a line in one of her files. Establish possible mental health decline early, soft reference now, harder push later if needed. She had been seeding doubt, not just in others, but in me. I sat back in the chair and realized I had no idea who I'd been living with. Kristen wasn't just a cheating spouse. She was something else entirely. Someone who thought in timelines, strategies, exits. Someone who could fabricate conflict just to later resolve it and earn goodwill points. Someone who had written out how to cry in a way that felt authentic enough to me. And the scariest part? It had worked. For months, I'd been walking around our home, arguing, apologizing, reconnecting, withdrawing, believing I was reacting naturally. But I was being nudged. Every emotional outburst, every tense silence, every so-called reconciliation. It had been tested, timed, tailored. She had turned me into a marionette without me ever seeing the strings. At some point that afternoon, I closed the laptop and just sat there in silence. The house was quiet. Kristen wouldn't be home for hours, but I felt watched. Not physically, just observed, measured. She'd gotten good at that. I stood and walked to the kitchen, made myself a sandwich I couldn't eat. My appetite was gone. I paced. I tried to turn on the TV, but the noise felt fake, like background audio in a bad movie. By the time Kristen got home, I was sitting on the couch, trying to look normal. She walked in like she always did, bag on her shoulder, phone in hand, voice cheerful. "Hey, babe," she said, kissing my cheek. "You feeling any better today?" I nodded, smiled, said I was fine. She didn't suspect a thing. Of course she didn't. I was playing my part. She changed into yoga clothes and said she had a class. I smiled again, told her to enjoy it. As soon as she left, I went back into the files, back into the choreography. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not when she still thought she controlled the script. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, I realized something important. I'd been trying to figure out how she changed.